So first we're going to start off with an overview of Acumatica. We're going to go into inventory. Then we're going to talk about purchasing. Then price lists. Show you how to process an order. Take a sales order and process it. And reporting. So let's get started. So you can see I'm logged in here in Acumatica. Here's the admin user. As such, I have access to every single thing in the software. Acumatica is role-based, so based on the user that's logged in, those rights would be restricted accordingly. You can see Acumatica supports multi-company, so I can switch off to the company that I want and start conducting business accordingly. Only the users that have rights to those companies can do so. Over here, I have my menuing. So I can click on my workspace and see my menu items. If I click Show All, it'll show all of the menu items there. Otherwise, you can configure this just to show the frequently used items. Notice you have action cards here, and anything you do that you'd like to add to favorites, you can click here, and it'll be added to favorites accordingly. So now once I do that, I can see all of my favorites here. At the top of the screen, I have a global search. The global search allows me to search for first menu items. So if you're having difficulty finding it here, you can search for the menu item. But if you hit the Enter button, Acumatica will continue to search through transactions and profiles, then help topics. So you can see all the help topics. Acumatica's help is super powerful. And then files. So here's all the files that you've attached throughout Acumatica, whether it's a customer profile or a vendor bill. Doesn't matter, they're all available here, and you could search them. If I wanted to find, like, for example, an invoice, I can go into receivables and go to invoices. And you can see the invoice numbers are here. You can search accordingly. But the global search also will search for these items. So, for example, if I'm looking for 12035, you can see it'll find it accordingly, and then you can open it up from here. Acumatica also has a history button that allows you to see all of the different screens and the places that you've been. So you can see here I was involved with shipment number 005043. Any of these documents or records or history items, I can add these as a favorite, and now they'll show up over here as well. So any transactions that you'd like, you can add them to your favorites over here into the history. Back to the invoice list. So Acumatica allows you to click on any column and do a quick sort or a filter. So I'm clicking on the type. I can pick what filters I want, invoice, credit memos, those kinds of things. If I click a date, notice I can also sort by or do a filter by date. You know, this month is an option. I can search for anything I'm looking for. So again, our search is extremely easy to use. So if I just type a few numbers, in this case, it'll find it. You can create filters at the top. So for example, if I want to create one, I can click over here and say, I only want, for example, invoices with a date that maybe is today. But in this case, I'll say within the last year. So I could say today minus 365. This needs to be greater than or equal to. And then I could save it as this year's invoices and apply. And now that's what you'll see. Invoices within the last year. So maybe a different wording on that. So very easy to find records. Additionally, what you can do is a quick pivot table. So I can take this data and I could say save as pivot, and I could say invoices by customer by year. And I'm going to change the filter because I only have 12 months here. But it'll quickly bring up a pivot table configuration. So I can say customer name as my row, my date as my column, and then maybe I'm looking to see totals and amounts. I could also do the count. But in this case, I have the date field, but I don't want every date for my columns. I want to round by year. I'll turn this off. And then you see quickly you have all the invoices by customer and by year. And you could drill down to any of these columns. And this stands for everywhere through Acumatica. I'm only showing you receivable invoices. But if I were to go to, for example, finance journal transactions, you could do the same thing. Regardless of the data set, you could do pivot tables everywhere. So in Acumatica, under inventory, we have the ability to have multiple warehouses. So if I go to inventory and I click on warehouses, you could see in my demo system, I have a bunch set up. We take a look at one. You could see some of the configurations that we have here in the system. So if we go all the way down to the bottom, you can see all your different bin locations. And notice not only can you configure these bin locations, but you can also define the behavior that you'd like to have with them. For example, whether or not you can sell out of them. If it's a quarantine bin, maybe I can't sell out of it. Whether I allow receipts. Whether I want my available count, so our booked quantity for inventory, is different than our available. Our available allows us to discount things like what you have on sales orders so you don't oversell. But this allows you to configure that. So, for example, counter sales will be included in quantity available, but drop ship only will not. And you can go through, there's a bunch of configuration items here. Additionally, you could define how you'd like to use the average cost, how you handle your RMA, what the RMA location is, just as a default. We support carts and totes with our advanced WMS option. Additionally, inventory planning allows you to determine whether or not this particular warehouse is involved in forecast, your inventory on hand, whether you should consider sales orders placed against these warehouses, and so on. If we open up an item, we'll go to inventory, stock items. This gives me a list of all my stock items, very similar to the invoice list in terms of moving columns around and doing a search and everything. But this is inventory items. If I click on any item, you can see that Acumatica allows me to, first off, determine what my unit of measure is for this. So how am I going to stock it? How am I going to sell it? And how am I going to purchase it? Additionally, you can configure different types of unit measures in case you want to sell all of a sudden in boxes of 10 or purchase. Over here, you could see our valuation. We support average, FIFO, specific if you have serialized inventory. If we move over, you can see here's where you define your pricing and your cost, your last cost, the cost you'll use in purchase orders. But we're going to get into this a little bit later on how to manage your pricing. Over here under warehouses, these are all the warehouses that this item has ever gone through, either purchased or sold through. And Acumatica gives you the ability to configure these warehouses differently. Notice some of the inventory settings with regards to forecast and demand and what to do if you run short on this item. But if I click on, for example, the wholesale warehouse, earlier you saw the configuration for the warehouse, the defaults, but this is the warehouse default for this particular item. So how do I store this item? My GL accounts, but moreover, my inventory planning. So I can configure for this warehouse what my min-max should be, what my safety stock points should be, my transfer ERQ. I can set up automatic transfers between warehouses. And notice the lead times. How long does it take to get it from a vendor? How long does the vendor take to supply you with this item? Or is there any additional lead time specific to this item? Acumatica supports item classes. You can call it a category. And the item class itself is great for reporting because you can break down your different items and report on the different category and the sales history and all that they're part of. But it also offers a default. So when you create a new item based on this item class, it'll pull in all of these default settings so you don't have to add them every single time. Notice it also has inventory planning settings as well. How do I want to plan this item for replenishment? And what's my replenishment warehouse? And if I'm analyzing my sales for doing forecasting, how many months do I want to go back, or quarters, or days? So let's get started with ordering items. We'll create a purchase order. This is our purchasing workspace, and notice a little bit about our workspace menus. So this is where I do all my single transactions. This is where I can do my automated operations, such as receive and put away, the kinds of things I might do with a handheld device, such as if you have the advanced warehouse management system. These are all my profiles. If I wanted to go in and look at vendors and edit them, I could do that here, vendor pricing and all that. Here's my process screens. Now, process screens allow you to do things in mass, where you're doing multiple transactions. So, for example, create purchase orders will allow the system to look out, see what's planned to be ordered, and it'll create all the purchase orders for you. You can see all your printed forms here. Normally, they're taken care of from, for example, the purchase order. You hit print, it'll use this report. Here's all your general reports for purchasing and your preferences. But let's go in and let's create a new purchase order. We'll select our vendor. And this vendor is not in the United States or Canada. But if I click on here, I can look up the different types of currencies that I can conduct business with this vendor. You can change this as a default. If we click on the vendor profile to take a look at that, and we go to financial, notice the default currency is USD, but we can change that to Euro. And we're allowing the user to override the currency as well as the rate if needed. Acumatica can do conversions. You could schedule it behind the scenes so that it automatically gets the latest spot rates. But let's change this to Euro. We'll add items to the purchase order. You can do that a couple of different ways. You can click on the plus button and start to type the items that you want to purchase. And you can tab over, add quantities, and then continue to tab over as you need to add another line item. Also, you can click the Add Items button. And this is more of an order guide. But notice at the top of the screen, it'll show you just vendor's items. I haven't purchased anything from this vendor before in my system. But you can uncheck that and look at all the items, see their quantities available, quantity on hand, and go through and decide how much do you want of what. So you can click over here, type quantity 5, and maybe order, another 3 of these. But you can continue to add and close. And then you can delete whatever you want. So that's our purchase order. Notice at the top of the screen we can add notes. And you'll see it's indicated here. This note, just like any other field in Acumatica, could be added to the purchase order form if you'd like it to. You can also add notes at the line item. Also can show up below this item per the different line item. You can also do attachments. So I have the ability to click over here and see any attachments that's included with this purchase order. I can drag and drop files here, or I can upload using the mobile app. If I click this button, my mobile app will pop up and ask me to attach a file. Notice Acumatica sends me a message to attach a file. Now, I could do that in a couple of different ways, but the Acumatica mobile app shows up here. I can either attach a file, upload it, or I could click on my camera and take a picture. check the box. And now notice what I have here. I have the attachment from my mobile device. Staying on the thread of the Acumatica Mobile App, you can see the screens here. These are all the menu items that are available for Acumatica at this time. You can add other menu items easily. Notice at the top of the screen, it's configured to have KPIs. So I can click on Add KPI. Any of the widgets throughout the system, I'll show the dashboards later, any of those widgets can be added from here, and you can click on them. Anything that you're looking for here, we'll click on a couple of them. And then when we go back, we now have KPIs on our mobile device. Notice Acumatica also gives me my history here, like we showed before. So I'm currently in this purchase order 2057. So it's keeping track of it in the real time. These are all the things that I've been into. You can go over here, you can do expense receipts. Here's where we also use our advanced WMS. This happens to be a phone, but the Android version will work on Android supported devices, mobile devices for warehouse picking, such as Zebra and that kind of thing. So let's maximize this and continue on. After I'm done with this purchase order, if I remove the hold, notice Acumatica goes into approval process because we have it turned on. So under approvals, for example, it's used our approval map, the one that's configured in my system, and it's assigned to Layla for her to get it approved. Now she can see that in Acumatica under approvals. So if she goes there, she'll be able to see her approvals and she can go in, analyze it, and then approve it or reject it with a reason. Now, because I'm an admin, then I can automatically approve this myself without having to go to Layla. And notice it keeps track of who approved it, when they did, and so on. So now we can enter our PO receipt, meaning receive it. And you can do so from this screen or, as I said, our advanced WMS. You could do it with a scanner on the dock. But over here, you can see we're going to receive these two items. And these are the receipt quantities. But I can change that if I'm only getting a partial. But once we're done, we can release this. Notice we received it in this currency. And now we can create a bill. So the bill comes in a couple of days later, probably, for this vendor. You could type a couple letters of the vendor's name in order to write a bill. And what we can do is we can add other line items here, such as additional, maybe some freight or something we didn't pick up on the purchase order. But we can go over here and add a purchase receipt. And notice the system will show the purchase receipts that are outstanding. We'll check off this one and click Add and Close. So now we're building this bill and we're confirming what the vendor sent us. And we can assure ourselves that what we've ordered and the amount we agreed to is exactly what we're getting. If not, we can call up the vendor. We can make changes and adjustments if we need to or if we have the rights. And as I said before, if you need to, you can add a shipping amount, for example, and then finish off the bill. Notice I forgot the vendor invoice number, one of the most critical things for posting a bill. So let me release it now. Additionally, if you use landed cost in Acumatica, we have a landed cost screen. So separately or when you're ready, you can create a landed cost transaction and associate it to a purchase receipt. So over here, we'll see a list of the vendors that we've assigned as a landed cost vendor, meaning you can have different vendors that provide you with product versus the vendors that actually are responsible for freight, for example. Or you can use the same vendor. So for example, if you use your own freight company to get something overseas, that's not a problem. Over here, I could put the landed cost transaction in. You can configure many different landed cost transaction types. Notice the allocation methods on these 3 examples. So this will take whatever the cost is and distribute it by the cost of the receipt. So it'll weigh it by the cost of the receipt of the items. This will do it by quantity, and this will do it by weight. And we have other options there. So in this case, we'll take it by customs duty. We'll put in $500. We'll go to the Details tab, and now we'll add a purchase order receipt here. If we check off that same vendor, the same purchase receipt that we used, and close this, notice Acumatica shows the different line items, all their detail, their weight and all that, their cost, but then it also shows the allocated amount. And if I save this, you'll see the amounts and how they were distributed. So then you could take this landed cost and you could pay out this vendor directly. As I said before, you could also include this in your bill if this vendor, this particular vendor, the one you bought the product from, is the same one that you have the landed cost on. Once we release this, it'll automatically update the cost of these items with this additional allocated amount. Throughout the system, Acumatica will show you different transactions and references. For example, I can get back to the purchase receipt number. If I click on landed costs, I can scroll over to the right and I can see the inventory transaction that was used to adjust the cost of these items that we landed. So you could see over here, if we scroll over to the right, you could see all these costs that were associated and that adjusted those items in stock. Same thing goes for your purchase receipt. We go back there. Notice over on Other, you can see the inventory transaction that was responsible for receiving those items into the system and all the transactions accordingly. So here you can see it, the inventory transaction. If I go to Finance, I can see the journal batch that was used here. So now let's talk about adjusting prices. So Acumatica, you can do this in a number of places. If you remember earlier when we were looking at stock items, we click on the same item. Acumatica, as far as the user interface goes, has this concept of side panels. And you can add additional side panels as you need to and configure them on screens that don't even have any side panels. But in the stock item profile, you can see your item sales prices, your item's vendor prices, your inventory summary, your allocation details, your history, and dead stock status. So if I click on item sales prices, you can see all the pricing that's been configured for this particular item. Now you can get to this screen separately as well, and you could even upload pricing if you need to. But keep in mind that this laptop, for example, has all this different prices. If I maximize this to show it a little clearer, you can see there's a base price set up. If I scroll over to the right, that's a base price of $500. But I also have 2 different types of prices. One is specific to customers. The other one is specific to groups of customers. So this is our bartender customer. This is a customer AA customer. And these are customers that are grouped into the classification of wholesale. If I scroll over to the right, notice the settings we have. We have different break quantities. So this customer will get this price if they buy 3 of them. Same thing with this customer. And additionally, this wholesale customer will get $450 if they buy 3 of them. So all customers associated to wholesale will get that as well. Notice you can have different pricing based on the currency. You can have different effective dates. You can have it based on the warehouse or even the unit measure. Additionally, Acumatica has price worksheets. So there's a vendor and a sales price worksheet. And essentially that's an extension of the sales price screen we were just in, except now it stores it as an audit trail. So you can take a price sheet, create one, work with it, and then release it and make it effective. And this is what it looks like. So the first thing we can do is we can add items. We can also copy prices. But if we add items, we can check off the items we want, or we can pick a certain category of items and select all those. And over here is the price type we're going to add this before we can do that. So if it's a customer price class, for example, a group of customers, and we want to choose wholesale, we can do that here. We'll select add. We can select all these items and add them as well, also to wholesale, and then close. Now we have all these items here, and they've been added accordingly. Here's the source price. Here's the pending price. Once we make sense of it, we're going to put our pending price in. As I mentioned before, you can upload this from a spreadsheet if you need to. You can come in here, double-click, and choose the prices that you want, and simply use the arrow key and continue down. So you could do that. You can also calculate pending prices. So what this allows us to do is take the original price and, for example, maybe mark it down to 90%. So you could see that here. But notice the checkbox down here. This is the price basis. So what we did is we used the source price to configure that 90% down. But we can use other areas. We can use the last cost plus a markup percent. That markup percent is stored in the item profile. We can use the MSRP also in the item profile, another field that you can use. Or we could take our existing prices, pending prices, and mark those down as well. So for example, if we want to take the last cost, and maybe we want to take the last cost, and we can use 100% if all of our items have a markup percentage configured in them. But we can also say 110% if we know that they don't. And if we click update, you'll notice the system will update it to 10% over the cost of the item, plus the markup percent, which I'm pretty sure we don't have anything configured in here. So once you do that, you can define the effective date. Acumatica will respect that effective date. You can even put an expiration date if you check off promotional, and these prices will be effective accordingly. Once you're done, you could remove the hold and release this pricing. So let's write a sales order. At the top of the screen, we have different order types that allows us to categorize different types of orders. For example, if you use our e-commerce connector to either Shopify or BigCommerce, you might want to have all those orders come in as a different order type so you can segregate them and run performance numbers on them. But we'll tab down. We can put in the customer's PO number if there is one. We could type a couple letters of the customer's name. Or we can click on this magnifying glass, press the F3 key, and do a search that way as well. Acumatica has unlimited number of shipping address locations, as well as unlimited number of contacts that you can have with the customer. Over here, I can hit the plus button, just like the purchase order, and I could type a few items, use my tab key, put the quantity in, and move down. Now, additionally, you may want to configure this accordingly. Notice what we have here. We have a couple of columns, and for my size screen, they may not be needed where they're at. But related items allows us to upgrade and downgrade the item that we picked for the customer. Substitute, free item, these are all things that we can use and visualize as we're writing the order. But in this case, I'm going to take these items, go into my column configurator, and I'm going to slide these over. This gives me a better visibility of my order and my quantities and my amounts. Also notice that my menu here, I can collapse that. You can also add items using this order guide, similar to a purchase order. So you can see all the items here. Again, their quantity, quantity available, quantity on hand. Show available items is checked here. So if I'm on the phone with the customer, I can suggest items that we have already. I could search for any item here. So if I type a few letters, Acumatica will do a search for it. You can also filter by item class. You can filter by warehouse. And if we uncheck this box, it'll show everything, even the ones that we don't have. But we can also see sales history. So over here, it gives us, by default, the last 90 days of sales history for this given customer. If I go back and select a date a little further back, it'll show the items that the customer bought. It'll show how much they bought and what date they bought these items on and what they paid for it. So you can also do that maybe as a suggestion. Hey, you bought these items before, why not buy them again? With a sales order, we have the ability to add any attachments. So if I want to attach something to this, similar to before where I can click upload, I can drag and drop any file right on top of this gray area. Once I do that, the files will get updated. I can drag and drop multiple files and multiple files will get uploaded. Notice at the bottom of the screen in Acumatica, I can see for this item, the line I'm selected on, my on hand, my available for shipping, and my allocated. So what this is telling me is I have 305 in stock in my warehouse. I have 300 available because I have another sales order with quantity 5 on them. So available for shipping is technically 305 because I just have an open or on hold sales order somewhere else. So you could cheat this. But if you wanted to allocate, you can go to line details and you can check off allocated, and this will hard allocate these 4 for this particular order. And what that means is when I go back to the other order, the available for shipping will be 4 less because we've hard allocated it to this particular sales order. So it's no longer available. At the top of the screen, you'll notice all my menu items. You'll also notice a copy and paste. So if I see a sales order I like, I can click copy, create a new one, and hit paste. I can even save templates. You can see there's a quick order for computers here. But if I go into my menu over here, you could see all the menu items that are available based on the status of this order. So for example, I can print this sales order. Any menu items that I like, I can add those to my favorites. So you can see it's now shown up there. But if we go back to the printout, this is what the sales order form looks from Acumatica, the default. But you can configure these reports any way you want. But after you have the sales order up on the screen, you can hit the send button. And Acumatica will use the email for this particular customer. You can define which contacts to use. There's preferences for that. But the email template will come up. That comes from the report, so you can configure this as well. You can make any changes that you want. This could say Dear Bob or Barkeep in this case. And notice the attachment's a PDF of the sales order printed form. But I can click the send button. And when I go back to the sales order, you'll notice, once I refresh, that there's an activity. That activity is me sending out and emailing that sales order to the customer. Any replies would also show up here. And you can continue a conversation and see it tracked under activities against this sales order, but also against the customer. So if I open up the customer, I maximize it, you'll notice under activities, there's the activity that just sent out that sales order. One other thing to note in the customer profile, and we also have this in the main preferences, is under mail and printing. This is what I mentioned before. So for this particular form, I could decide which contact will get the appropriate emails accordingly. And you could define the email here. You'll see it. You can decide whether it's a 2 or a CC and whatnot. Now, if we go back to this sales order, I can have this particular line marked as a drop ship because who knows, maybe it'll get there faster than we can send it out from the vendor. So we'll mark that accordingly. We'll save it. And now right from the sales order, if we have the rights, we can create a purchase order. We can also do this globally. As I talked about before, we have process screens that can look at all your sales orders. Any of them that are marked for dropship, it'll create the purchase orders accordingly. But I can click on this button here. Acumatica brings us to that process screen, but it pre-fills in the specific order number, so we're only doing that particular one. I'll click on Process All. Acumatica uses the default vendor associated with that item profile. Otherwise, you could change it here. Because we only created one purchase order, Acumatica brings it to us. If we had created a bunch, Acumatica would show us the list of purchase orders, then we can go in and look at the list. But here's our dropship purchase order. Notice under shipping, it ships to not a specific address like our warehouse, for example, but to the customer. Notice there's a link back to the sales order. We can get to it from here. So if I'm the purchasing person and I see a note about a certain drop ship that maybe is delayed, I can get right down to the sales order that's associated with it and talk to the customer and let them know, or let the salesperson know. Now, if we go back to the sales order, you'll also notice if we scroll over to the right, the specific purchase order that this is associated with and its status. So you can get back and you could create events and alerts so that a salesperson can let their customer know what's going on. But you can also automate emails directly to the customer as to the status of this dropship. With Acumatica, in order to ship things, it's quite easy. We have these process screens. We've talked about them. Under process orders, we have the ability to take orders into a step where we can send them to the warehouse if they're ready to be shipped. So if we go to this process order screen, we select the action, create shipment. We can see all the sales orders that are potentially eligible. Acumatica will go through this and test the orders for stock availability. So you could check off the orders you want, and this will turn it into shipment. So if we click on the sales order button again, just to see the menu, you could see we have a sales order document, a shipment document, and an invoice. That's the workflow to get the document done. So in this action, we would take the sales order and turn it into a shipment. That's something that the warehouse can handle. So we could check off these boxes and click process. But for companies with a different workflow where they want to know in advance before creating shipments, and maybe they want to jumble things around, if you go to sales orders, we have an option called Manage Sales Allocations. So over here you have actions. You can allocate or deallocate. We'll select allocate. We'll pick our warehouse. And what you see here are a number of different line items for different orders. And what you can do here is you can check off the box. Earlier you saw me go into line details and hard allocate items to a specific order. Well, you can do that globally from here, regardless of the sales order. So you check off the items that you want, and you can allocate them. But notice there's an option here. We can go either by line ship on date, meaning the system will sort by line ship on date. We can go based on order date. Requested on is a date that the customer actually requested, or a cancellation date. All of these are configured at the line level. At least these three are. This is at the summary of the order level. But they give you the ability to make decisions and get certain items out the door that are most critical for your customers. So if I select all these and I click process, then those are locked in and nobody can take those items and maybe grab them for another order. So that's our managed sales allocations. Shifting gears, if we go over to our banking, Acumatica allows you to do your bank recs through a transactional document. But before we get there, you have the ability to import bank transactions. You can use an OCX file or a QBO file, QuickBooks Online file, and you can import your bank transaction to the system. You can also configure bank feeds. Out of the box, Acumatica comes with one free bank feed license. You can log into your bank account and have it automatically bring in transactions into Acumatica. Once you've done that, and I don't have any data to show here, but once you've done that, you have the ability to go in and analyze these transactions and pre-clear them well before you ever do your bank rec. So what that means is on the left-hand side would be all the transactions that I'm just getting to know about my bank. They just came down. I can highlight the one over here on the left-hand side. I could either match it to a payment, a customer payment or a vendor payment. I can match it to an invoice and have Acumatica create the payment accordingly. Or I can create a transaction and allocate it to a certain GL account. So for example, anything that Acumatica doesn't know about, meaning transactions your bank knows about, Acumatica doesn't, you would use this option here. Once you're done and you click process, Acumatica creates all of the different transactions. It links everything and pre-clears everything. And then you could move on to your bank rec. Now, if we open up a bank rec here, we'll click plus to create a new one. This shows all the outstanding transactions that we can clear based on the bank statement. Now, if you click on Reconcile Process, the previous step that we just did, all the processing, where we brought in all our bank transactions from the bank, and then we pre-cleared them, it'll automatically check all those so that bank recs can be a breeze. There may be a couple of items maybe left, but normally, once you click Reconcile Process, you're good to go. You put your statement ending balance in here, remove the hold, and release this. So regarding currency management, if we go into currency, you can see you can define your different currency rates. You could refresh the currency rates. Acumatica will run reports for history about your rates based on the date. And you can add different rate types. If we go to refresh currencies, one of the things I didn't mention during this demo is that a lot of the screens, the process screens, have this button here. This allows us to schedule things and run them on a frequency. So for example, when we looked at process orders, create shipments, we could easily schedule that for a couple of times a day and send the data over to the warehouse so they could start picking without anybody lifting a finger. But under the refresh currency rates, I can check off the rates that I'd like to refresh and click process. And again, I could do this daily if I want to schedule. So now we've gotten the latest rates and they've been updated accordingly into the system. If we go back to banking and we go over to our cash accounts are associated closely to the GL account, but they have some preferences. So these are all of our accounts that we monitor. Some of them we reconcile, some of them we don't need to. But if we click on, for example, this one, this is a checking account for this particular business. We've associated with a GL account that has the currency US. So any cash accounts, if you write payments in foreign accounts, you would create another cash account and associate it with a GL account that's tracked in a foreign currency. So having said that, when we create our payment methods, we can associate our payment method, tell it whether we're using it for vendors or receiving it for customers, but we can associate it with certain cash accounts, and some of them, for example, might be euro. So having said all that, if we go to do a check run, again, on our process screen, we go to Prepare Payments. We can select the payment method that we want, so it's a check. And based on our preferences in the payment method, we've elected to have multiple different types of cash accounts, one of them being euros. So if we're making a payment out of this type of account, we can do so, and Acumatica will accordingly adjust the rates and make the conversions. In this case, I'm going to do a US account. Acumatica allows you to filter by your vendor class, by vendor, or a project. In this case, project accounting is turned on. Doesn't need to be. But we can also filter based on the pay date or the due date. So the due date of the invoice, or in Acumatica, we actually have payment dates. So what does that mean? Well, there's delivery times that it takes from the due date in order to make sure that you're not late. So when we look at any one of these bills, or we look at the vendor, there could be a discrepancy. Maybe the due date is on the 1st, but you need to pay it on the 27th to make sure that the vendor gets it. So that's why we have two different dates. You can consider your cash discounts, and you could always take them. But over here, what you're seeing is a list of bills. And we can check off the ones we want to pay. Notice Acumatica is updating the selection amount of my check run accordingly over here. If you scroll over to the right, this is an area where we have maybe a few too many columns configured. So I'm going to turn some of those columns off. I don't care about projects right now. So I'm going to move all these columns, or maybe take them out. And over here, you can start to see the pay date, the due date, and the amount paid. I like to keep that close. So over here, for example, if you need to make a partial payment, maybe we're only paying $2,000 of this invoice, you can do so. Once we're done, we can click Process. Notice the Pay Separately option. If you don't have that checked, it'll take a single vendor and it'll bundle the multiple invoices on the same check. Here we can see 4 different checks that we're writing. And our next check number is associated with the cash account. But if we need to, we can adjust that. And we can click Process. So this shows our check form. Our check form is configurable. Currently, you see the check body at the top of the screen, and then you have 2 stubs below. But more times than not, we have the body in the center with a stub at the top and the bottom. But either way, we can do that. We can even do MIC or printing. Here are all the checks that printed from that check run. If I go back to Acumatica's screen, you'll see that it's brought me to the release payments. So assuming these checks printed out correctly, I can click the Process button and use the action Release. But if they haven't, I have a couple of options. One is reprint, whereas I want to just reprint with the same check number. That might be, maybe I printed on white piece of paper, but I didn't damage the checks. But if I did, I had the checks in the wrong way, my check form in the wrong way, and I damaged the check numbers, then I could reprint with a new number. But once I'm done, I can click Process here, and that'll release the payments and post it to the GL. So let's get on to some reporting. There are a number of ways to run reports in Acumatica. As we mentioned before, you can go in and look at your reports area, and you can see here's a daily sales profitability form. So we can go back maybe a few years, and we could run this. We could run a detailed form or a summary form, depending upon how the report works. It'll get different results, but we'll click on Run. And notice how fast Acumatica is at reporting. This is 102 pages, and it came up very quickly. But this shows all the different invoices and their margin percentages, the cost and the net sale. If we went back to reconfigure this report and click on Summary and run it again, you can see instead it does it by customer. And it's gone out and it's collated everything. By customer, we now have our margins and profitability. But we also have these inquiry screens. And this, for example, is one that's out of the box. It's a pricing analysis. And you'll notice that this particular screen is something that we've seen prior. So we looked at it when we looked at invoices and sales orders. It's essentially a listing of records screen. But this one in particular has the ability, and it's configured for us to do a sales profitability analysis. Notice it has parameters at the top that we could filter on. So we have our date field, our date from and date to. We could filter by a salesperson, by an item category, even a customer category. And what we can do here is configure different types of pivot tables. We showed a pivot table earlier but this is a good example of how to see your customers' profitability or performance. So if we click over here, what we could do is for our row, make it the customer. For our column, we can maybe show, for example, the date of the transaction. And then for our amount, we could choose the margin like we had on that other report, or we could just choose the total amount of the sale. Now for the date, we're going to change this to round by year. We'll turn off this gear. And now we can see our customers and their sales performance amount. Now if I change these dates a little bit, you can see all your customers and year by year sales totals. And not only that, you can click on and see what are those actual records that are making up, for example, this 122,000. So this is very useful, and you could do a lot of things here. If we scroll down to dashboards, we haven't talked about dashboards. Acumatica delivers a number of dashboards out of the box. If we take a look at our customer view, this dashboard, and you can configure any dashboards any way you want, has a number of widgets. So for sales opportunities and orders, you can see that we have 12 orders to ship, 12 late orders, 155 open opportunities, and some overdue opportunities. We have a bird's eye view into our accounts receivable, our support, number of cases, recent activities, items that have been sold, the top items that have been sold in the last 12 months. So you can see all this information. At the top of the screen, we can even add parameters to these dashboards. So for example, if I select a customer, Acumatica can filter based on the parameter here. You can add many parameters if you'd like to. If we click on the design button, you can move these widgets around. You can add new widgets. And here's all the different types of widgets we can do. You saw KPIs, that's the counters over here. We can also do trending cards. We can do pivot tables. Here's some data tables, some charts. Charts include maybe 4 or 5 chart types, from line to bar to pie and that kind of thing. And there's your trending card. You can even have a link to another web page or another area in Acumatica for ease of use. The dashboards, you can apply different roles to them so that certain people can get them, and certain people can configure them to be their home page. So when they start the day in the morning, they have just what they need to get started. So thanks for watching this demo. I hope you found it useful. Have a great day.